So hi everyone, today's unit that we'll be doing is public law. My name is Shazia Khan, and I will be doing the sessions with you. The last session we did was learning outcome 3, and today's session is learning outcome 4. In the last session, I'll give you a summary of what we did in the last session, so you've got a better idea of what we did in the last session, which was learning outcome 3. We looked at the meaning and consequences of rule of law and parliamentary sovereignty, and we looked at the importance of the rule of law, which is to provide equality for all, so everyone should be treated the same, and no man is actually punishable unless there's a law in place. We looked at the definition of rule of law. We looked at what parliamentary sovereignty is in the UK and why it's so important, and why we need to look at the Human Rights Act in regards to parliamentary sovereignty. So we looked at the Human Rights Act. It came into force in 1998, but I was came into force in 2000 October. And we looked at the protection of fundamental and civil rights under the Act, which was, the right to life, the right to security, liberty. We also concentrated on the Article 4, which was in regards to slavery and forced labour. We looked at the issue regarding a royal prerogative, what that meant, why that was important historically and now today in the UK. We looked at the issue of the Reform Act 1832 and the Reform Act 1867, importance of that. We also looked at a really important academic, which was DiL, and we looked at conventions as a source of the UK Constitution, and looked at cases such as Attorney General and Jonathan Cape, D. Case's Royal Hotel case, which was to do with conventions. We then went on to look at parliamentary sovereignty and the limits in the UK, and referred to the case of Aaron Jackson, which was to do with the Hunting Act 2004. We looked at the GCHQ and judicial review in reference to public law disputes against a public authority. And we also looked at the issue in regards to the case of Pepper and Hart, and we also identified some issues in regard to the doctrine of supremacy and why it's so important in the UK. And these have all been recorded for you for learning outcome. So this was the last one was learning outcome 3. The one learning outcome 1 and 2 has been recorded as well, and they will be available for you. So if you need to refer to them, so today's learning outcome is to understand the composition of the operation of legislature and the UK government, and this is looking at learning outcome 4. So we've already done 3, so we just need to look at 4, and then we've got next week learning outcome 5, and then the assignment session.
All right.
So you need to make sure you go on to Moodle, because all your resources and any sort of additional resources will be available on Moodle, okay?
Okay.
So key terminology. So what is a bill? A bill is a proposal for a new law or a proposal to change an existing law presented for debate before Parliament. A bill can start in the Commons or the Lords and must be approved in the same form by both parties. Why do you think there's a need for a bill to be amended? Why do you think if there's a need for a bill to be amended, what might be a reason that they may want either a new law in place or a bill to be amended? Why do you think?
Because as society changes, the laws have to be amended.
Yes. So as society changes, the rules have to be amended, okay? And also the fact is, there may be an incident that occurs that there's a need for a new law, okay? For example, do you remember the situation with COVID?
Yeah.
There was need for new policies and laws to be brought in place during COVID time. Also issues, another good example is issues in regard to terrorism. If there's been any sort of terrorism attacks, the laws need to be reformed around that. you know, so any sort of new laws or any sort of changes that need to be come into place would start at a bill and then become an act of parliament. An act of parliament, also called a statute, is a law made by the UK Parliament. All acts start as bills introduced in either the House of Commons or House of Lords. And when both houses agree the bill, then it goes to the royal assent. Who do you think it goes to the royal assent for? Who do you think has the final approval?
The
Who has to sign
king.
it off? Sorry?
The king.
The king. The king now, before it was the queen, now the king.
Queen.
And the reason behind it is that they have to identify that they've approved it and they have to sign it off. Acts are known as primary legislation because they do not depend on other legislative authorities. So, illustrating the passage of an act of parliament. So how does a bill become a law? So stages in English law. So we've got a bill, which is an introduction, can be introduced by the government or by an MP. Initial proposals are set out in the green paper for the discussion after feedback in a white paper is presented to the houses. Okay. First reading, the first reading is brief and just an introduction. The document is printed and drafted to all members, circulated to all members. Then they have a second reading, and the second reading is the most important, as it's the first opportunity to debate if there's any sort of amendments to be made. Here is where they vote at the end and vote whether the bill can be defeated or not, so whether they accept it or not. Then the committee stage involves detailed examination of the bills, followed by the proposed amendments. Each clause is agreed, modified or removed. So if there's any changes that need to be made, this is made at the committee stage. Once the committee stage has finished its scrutiny of the bill, it reports back to the House for another debate for the bill and any amendments made. The third reading is the final chance debate where the bill is restricted, and then once both houses have approved it, the Prime Minister presents it to the monarch and the king, and it's signed, and then the bill becomes an act of parliament. Why do you think this process is quite good to have in place?
I don't know.
Do you think this, you know, the first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, third reading, do you think it's really good? Because it happens both in the House of Commons and House of Lords. Do you think it's a good process to have?
Definitely, but I don't know exactly why.
No, it's okay. You can say, you can give, nothing's wrong or right until we kind of identify it, okay? So don't worry about it. It is a good process to have. The reason is it can be, a bill will not become a law until it's scrutinized. Scrutinized means it's there and it's everyone, all the MPs, the House of Commons, House of Lords, scrutinize all the bill to make sure that what they've put in the bill becomes an act of parliament, and they need to make sure everything is right. Okay, so if there's any amendments that need to be made, any changes that need, and it's so good because it goes through so many people, so each person can scrutinize it. So it's a good process to have. It's sometimes a lengthy process, but a good process. So bills starting in the House of Commons. So you have the House of Commons, first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, and then you have the House of Lords, first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, and third reading. Any sort of consideration for amendments. A bill is proposal for a new law or proposal to change an existing law presented for debate before Parliament. A bill can start in the Commons or the Lords and must be approved in the same form by both houses before becoming an act. And it's quite a rigorous process because it has to go through the same process for both the House of Lords and House of Commons. So it goes through, two processes, but all obviously then it goes through scrutiny as well. So bill starting in the House of Commons. And we're going through the stages now, okay? So first reading is the first stage of a bill's passage through the House of Commons, usually a formality. It takes place without a debate. The first reading of a bill can take place at any time in parliamentary session, and the short title of the bill is read out and followed by an order for the bill to be printed. The bill is published as the House of Commons first time. The next stage is the second stage, and this is the opportunity for MPs to debate any sort of general principles and themes of the bill. So what do you think happens at this stage? Second stage. It's the first opportunity for MPs to debate the main principles of the bill. Do you think here they identify whether there's a need for the bill?
Yeah.
And whether there's a need for a new law to come into place. So second reading is the first opportunity for MPs to debate the main principles of the bill. It usually takes place no sooner than 2 weekends after the first reading. The government minister, spokesperson of MP responsible for the bills, open the second reading debate. The official opposition spokesperson responds with their views on the bill. So it's important that they are able to identify it. Then the debate continues with the opposition parties and backbench MPs giving their opinions. At the end of the debate, the Commons decides whether the bill should be given its second reading by voting, meaning it proceed to the next stage. It is possible for the bill to have a second reading with no debate as long as MPs agree to its progress. Once second reading is complete, the bill proceeds to the committee stage where each clause, each part of the bill, any amendments for the bill may be debated. So this is the crucial part, is the committee stage. Here is where the bill is examined with the fine-tooth comb. It usually starts with a couple of weeks of the bill's second reading. And here is where any amendments, any proposals for change or discussion are selected, and amendments proposed by MPs will be published daily and reprinted. So here is where it all starts, and whether, you know, it needs to be scrutinized, if there's any sort of amendments for changes, any sorts of issues in regard to any clauses. So if there's any clauses that need to be changed or removed from the bill, this may happen. So for example, you know, if there was a law, not recently, but a couple of years ago, that was passed that you can't use your mobile phone whilst driving. And, you know, if there were any amendments made to that, because what identified in that is that you get 6 points and a fine. So, you know, if they wanted to change it to 3 points, they would have amended it or removed the clause. Also, there was a law that you can't drive your car with flip-flops. Now, the issue here is a sandal. What would they regard a sandal as? So they identify it as a flip-flop. So, you know, you can't drive with a certain a shoe design because of causing accidents. So these kind of clauses may be put into an agreement, but here is where they decide, you know, the selection of any sort of amendments need to be made, and they will receive any sort of amendments here and any sort of consideration of anything that needs to be changed or removed. And then we've got the bill starting in the House of Commons, the report stage. Report stage give MPs an opportunity on the floor to consider further amendments, any sort of proposals for change to a bill which has been examined in the committee. There's no set time period between the end of the committee stage and the start of the report stage. All MPs may speak and vote for lengthy or complex bills, and the debates may be spread over several days. All MPs can suggest amendments to the bill or new clauses, so they can add something to the bill. Report stage is normally followed immediately by debate on the bill's third reading. The third reading is the final chance for the Commons to debate the contents of the bill. It usually takes place immediately after the report stage as the next item of the business on the same day. Debate on that bill is usually short and limited to what actually is in the bill, rather than at the second reading what might have been included. Amendments, again, proposals for change cannot be made to a bill at a third reading at the Commons, because it should have all been done at the start, okay? In the second reading, the committee stage. If the bill started in the House of Commons, it has to go to the House of Lords for its first reading. If the bill started in the Lords, it returns to the House of Lords for consideration any amendments the House of Commons have made. So this is bills starting in House of Commons, the first reading. So this is in the Lords. What we've discussed happened in the Commons. This is what happens in the Lords, okay? Because it has to go back and forth. Why do you think it's so important that it has to go back and forth to the House of Commons and House of Lords?
Don't know.
Why do you think it's so important that it has to go back and forth?
I don't know.
It's okay. You can just, if something needs to be passed through law and something needs to become law, why do you think it's so important that we have to send it back and forth?
Just to make sure that more amendments are made.
Yes, to make sure that the amendments are made, and also to make sure that nothing is missing through the bills, okay, for it to become a law. So this is in the first reading in the House of Lords. So first reading is the first stage of bills passed through the House of Lords. Usually a formality, it takes place without a debate. The first reading of a bill can take place at any time in parliamentary session, and the long title indicating the content of the bill is read out by the member of the Lords in charge of the bill. So the last one we looked at, the first, second committee stage reading, third reading, roll assent, was part of the Commons. This is part of the Lords, okay? Once formally introduced, the bill is printed. The next stage is the second reading. It's the first opportunity for members of the Lords to debate the main principles and purpose. Second reading is the first opportunity for members of the Lords to speak and debate the key principles and the main purpose of the bill, and to flag up any concerns or specific areas where they think there should be any amendments or changes that need to be made. The government minister here, spokesperson or member of the Lords responsible for the bill, opens the second debate. Any member can speak during the second debate. This stage can indicate those members particularly interested in a bill or specific aspect of it, and those are most likely to be involved in suggesting any sort of changes later on. Second reading debates usually last for a few hours, but can sometimes stretch to a couple of days. After the second reading, the bill goes to the committee stage. The committee stage for the Lords involves detailed line-by-line examination of the separate parts, so any sort of clause and schedules of the bill. Starting from the front of the bill, members work through to the end. Any member of the Lords can take part. Usually starting about 2 weeks after the second reading debate, committee stage generally lasts up to 8 days, but it can go on for longer. Before the committee stage begins, amendments, changes are gathered together and placed in order, then published in a marshalled list. During committee stage, every clause of the bill has to be agreed to and votes on any amendments. All suggested amendments have been considered if a member wishes, and members can discuss an issue as long as they want. The government cannot restrict the subjects under discussion or impose a time limit. And the reason behind that is, everyone needs to have the right to, freely discuss any issues or any amendments that need to be take place for the bill, because, it's good to scrutinize it first before it goes through the whole system and then goes through gets through all assent, and then once it becomes an act, then it has to be changed again. So it's best if it gets scrutinized properly first. A report stage where gives all members a further opportunity in the Lords to examine, make any changes to the bill. It usually starts 14 days after the committee stage has concluded and can be spread over several days, but is generally shorter than the committee stage. Before the report stage begins, amendments are gathered together and placed in order, then published in the marshalled list. During the report stage, detailed examination of the bills continue. Any member of the Lords can take part, and votes on any amendments may take place. After the report stage, the bill is reprinted to include all the agreed amendments, and the bill then moves to a third reading, a further chance for the Lords to discuss and amend the bill as it nears conclusion. The bill is amended and reprinted to include all the agreed amendments, and the bill then moves on to the third reading, which is the final chance for the Lords to amend the bill. Third reading is the Lord's chance for members to tidy up the bill, concentrating on and making sure the eventual law is effective and workable without any loopholes. Before third reading, amendments are gathered together and placed in order, then published in the Marshall list. Unlike the House of Commons, amendments can be made at third reading in the House of Lords, provided the issue has not been fully considered and voted on during either committee or the report stage. Third reading at the House of Lords. Amendments at third reading are often used to clarify specific parts of the bill and to allow the government to make good any promises they made at earlier stages of the passage of the bill. If the bill started in the Lords, it goes to the House of Commons for its first reading. The House of Commons reprints the bill with the Lords' amendments. If the bill began in the House of Commons, it's sent back after third reading to the Lords for consideration of Lords' amendments, or if they have no amendments in the Lords, it's sent to the monarch for royal assent. Consideration for amendments. When a bill has passed through third reading in both houses, it is returned to the first house where it started for the second house's amendment proposals for changes to be considered. Both houses must agree on the exact wording of the bill. It's so important. The wording of the bill is so important because then it becomes an act of Parliament. There's no set time between the third reading of a bill and consideration of Commons or Lords' amendments. If the Commons makes amendments to the bill, the Lords must consider them and either agree or disagree to the amendments or make alternative proposals. If the Lords disagree with any Commons amendments or makes alternative proposals, then the bill is sent back to the Commons. A bill may go back and forth between each house, which is referred to as ping pong, until both houses reach an agreement. And that's so important because they need to identify if the law, if when it becomes law, it's accurate and it's right. So they need to identify that they have to go back and forth all the time. So consideration of amendment continued. So once the Commons and Lords agree on the final version of the bill, it can then receive royal assent and become an act of Parliament. The proposals of the bill now become law. In exceptional cases, when the two houses do not reach an agreement, the bill falls. If certain conditions are met, the Commons can use the Parliament Acts to pass the bill without the consent of the Lords in following session. Royal assent. This is the final stage. So when a bill has completed all its parliamentary stages in both houses, so the House of Commons and House of Lords, it must have royal assent before it can become an act of Parliament. Royal assent is the monarch's agreement to make the bill into an act and is a formality. So here the king will sign the bill. There's no set time between the consideration of amendments to the bill and royal assent. It can even be a matter of minutes after ping pong is complete. When royal assent has been given to a bill, the announcement is usually made in both houses at a suitable break in each house's proceeding by the Lord Speaker in the Lords and the Speaker in the House of Commons to identify and to clarify that this has become law. At prorogation, the formal end of parliamentary year, Black Rod interrupts the proceedings of the Commons and summons all the MPs to the Lords' Chamber to hear the Lords Commissioners announce royal assent for each bill. The legislation within the bill may commence immediately after a set of period or after a commencement order by government minister. A commencement order is designed to bring into force the whole or part of an act of Parliament at a date later than the date of royal assent. If there is no commencement order, the act will come into force from midnight at the start of the day of royal assent. The practical implementation of an act is the responsibility of appropriate government department, not of Parliament. So bills starting in the House of Lords. So when a bill is started in the House of Lords, it undergoes the following steps, as we've discussed in earlier slides. First reading at the Lords, which is slide number 12. Second reading at the Lords, which is slide number 13. Committee stage Lords, slide number 14 to 15. Report stage Lords, number 16. Third reading Lords, slide number 17 to 18. First reading at the Commons, which is number 6. Second reading at the Commons, slide number 7. Committee stage, which is the Commons, slide number 8 to 9. Report stage Commons, slide number 10. third reading Commons, slide number 11, and consideration of any amendments, slide number 19 to 20, and then royal assent. So now we're going to go on to looking at 4.2, which is explain the structure of the devolved powers in the UK. Okay, so has anyone got any questions on the process of a bill becoming an act of parliament?
No, not you. No.
No? Do you
No.
understand the process and why it needs to go through both the House of Commons and House of Lords?
Yeah. Yes.
And why it needs to go through, you know, why there needs to be so many amendments to be made, you know, because the reason is it needs to be perfect to become an act of parliament.
Okay.
So 4.2, explain the structure of devolved powers in the UK. What is devolution? So devolution is about how parliaments and government make decisions. In the UK, it means that there are separate legislatures and executives in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. They have many powers to make laws and deliver public services. They're often called devolved powers. There's also the UK and UK Parliament and UK government. They retain some powers across the whole of the UK. They are often called reserved powers. Why do we have it? Devolution means that decision-making moves closer to the citizen and is more democratic. Devolution is not new. There have been different forms of devolution in the UK for decades, and it is common in other parts of the world. The current form of devolution in the UK goes back to the late 1990s. In 1997, voters chose to create a Scottish Parliament and a National Assembly for Wales. In Northern Ireland, devolution was a key part of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and was supported in a referendum in 1998. The UK government has also developed decentralisation in England. This is through the transfer of powers, budgets and responsibilities to mayors and through city deals. And this identifies the devolution in the legislature and executive, UK Parliament, UK government, Scottish Parliament, the legislature, National Assembly of Wales, the legislature, Northern Ireland Assembly, the legislature, the executive, UK government, Scottish government, Welsh government and Northern Ireland executive. And this identifies the issue around devolution from a timeline from 1997 up till 2017. How does it work? So across the UK, there are 4 different legislatures and executive, each with a different range of powers. The 4 administrations speak to each other to make devolution is successful, to make sure that it is successful. This happens in a lot of different ways. Ministers have formal discussions in meetings such as the Joint Ministerial Committee, where they have the GMC plenary, the GMC negotiations and the GMC Europe. Ministers also have one-on-one discussions and correspond with their counterparts. Civil servants also have regular contact across the administration. Our relations are guided by the Memorandum of Understanding and Devolution Guidance Notes, which can be found on the gov.uk website. There are different political parties in power in each of the administrations, each with their own ministers supported by civil servants to deliver their priorities. Civil servants working for the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government and the UK Government are all part of one civil service. Civil servants in the Northern Ireland Executive work for the Northern Ireland Civil Service, a separate organisation, but with similar values and codes and policies and things like that. Although civil servants across the UK work for different administrations, we should also still work together. By working together, they promote common professional standards, develop a complementary approach to decision-making, and also ensure good lines of communication. What do I need to know? It is important that you know how devolution affects the policies you work on or public services that you manage. Even if you work in an area that is completely devolved or completely reserved, you may often need to work with other administrations to make sure your policy or service is delivered successfully. It can also help you learn about what has worked elsewhere. So it's really important that they work together to identify what the needs of each person is, or the, you know, if one's working successfully and the other's not. but the settlements can be complex in some areas, partially reserved and partially devolved. It's important to speak to colleagues or experts in constitution teams or in territorial offices to understand exactly what is devolved or reserved in their area. The table here that identifies a summary of which powers are reserved and devolved. The terms are a little different in Northern Ireland: transferred, reserved, and accepted rather than reserved and devolved. And you can find out more about Northern Ireland settlement as well as Scotland and Wales settlements on the gov.uk website. 4.3. Appraise the extent of devolved powers of the Scottish Parliament's Welsh Assembly and the Executive Committee of Northern Ireland. Devolution is a process of decentralisation and puts power closer to the citizens so that local factors are better recognised in decision making. Let's look at each of the devolved parliaments. The Scottish Parliament at Holyrood can pass laws on devolved matters, in general those affecting most aspects of day-to-day life in Scotland. The key documents that define the powers of the Scottish Parliament are the Scotland Act 1998 and the Scotland Act 2012. And you can link on them if you want to have a look at what each act actually states, okay? The UK Parliament at Westminster can pass laws on reserved matters, in general those with a UK-wide or international impact. Devolved or reserved, what's the difference? Devolved matters include things like agriculture, forestry and fisheries, education and training, environment, health and social services, housing, law and order, local government, sport and the arts, tourism and economic development, and many aspects of transport. Reserved matters include benefits and social security, immigration, defence, foreign policy, employment, broadcasting, trade and industry, nuclear energy, oil, gas and electricity, consumer rights, data protection, and the Constitution. Both acts were passed by UK Parliament. The Scotland Act 1998 created a Scottish Parliament with powers to make laws on a range of issues. Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act 1998 lists what is reserved to the UK Parliament. If a matter is not mentioned as being reserved in this part of the Act, it is devolved. The Scotland Act 2012 gives more powers to the Scottish Parliament or to the Scottish ministers, including the transfer of some significant financial powers. The Act also formally changes the name of the Scottish Executive to the Scottish Government. The new powers devolved to the Scottish Parliament include: number 1, a new Scottish rate of income tax to be placed from April 2016, new borrowing powers for the Scottish Government, full control of stamp duty, land tax and landfill tax from April 2015, the power to introduce new taxes subject to the agreement of the UK Government, the power to make laws on matters relating to air weapons, and giving the Scottish ministers powers related to the misuse of drugs, the drink drive limit, the national speed limit, and the administration of elections to the Scottish Parliament. Devolution settlement in Wales. The Government of Wales Act 1998 provided for the establishment of the National Assembly for Wales following the affirmative devolution referendum in 1997. The Act provides for the transfer of the powers of the Secretary of State for Wales to the new Assembly. The Government of Wales Act 2006 fulfilled the government's commitment to move the Welsh devolution process forward. It has 2 key elements which have been implemented in 2007 of May. Formal separation between the Assembly and the Welsh Government to provide clarity to the respective remit and the role of the legislature and the executive, and to improve effective scrutiny. Also to enhance legislative powers for the Assembly through a new category of legislation called Assembly Measures, so that the legislative priorities for Wales are secured more quickly and easily. What is devolved? So the devolved guidance note, Parliamentary and Assembly primary legislation affecting Wales, explain the main features of the Welsh devolution settlement for UK government departments. The Wales Act devolved fiscal powers to the National Assembly for Wales for the first time, implementing the majority of the recommendations made by the Commission on Devolution in Wales. The first report, Empowerment and Responsibility, looked at fiscal powers to strengthen Wales. As we mentioned, the 2014 Act included conferring legislative competence on the Assembly to replace stamp duty, land tax and landfill in Wales. The Wales Act 2017 made further changes to the devolution settlement for Wales, implementing the government's commitment in the command paper, Powers for a Purpose towards a lasting devolution. This included putting in place a reserved powers model of devolution in Wales and devolving further powers to Assembly and Welsh ministers in areas such as elections, transport, energy and natural environment. Schedule 7 of the Government Act 2006 defines the scope of Assembly's legislative competence to make Assembly acts. Schedule 7A sets out the areas of the policy on which only Parliament can legislate, and any area not listed in Schedule 7 is devolved to the National Assembly for Wales. Devolution settlement, Northern Ireland. Here you would need to go on to Moodle and read the handout called Good Friday Agreement. Okay, so have a look at that in your own time. Okay, so
okay.
Moodle, a lot of the additional resources that are on Moodle will help you with your assignment areas. Okay, so the devolved institutions in Northern Ireland are constituted under the National Ireland Act 1998, with several institutional reforms having taken place since then. Northern Ireland ministers are chosen from the Northern Ireland Assembly in proportion to party strengths using the D'Hondt formula. The executive is headed by a First Minister and a Deputy First Minister who have equal status and must act jointly. The Northern Ireland devolution settlement gives legislative control over certain matters known as transferred matters to the Assembly. In the main, these are the economic and social field. The Assembly may also, in principle, legislate in respect of reserved matters, subject to various consent. Matters of national importance, which in normal course of events it is expected will remain in the responsibility of the HM government and Westminster, are known as accepted matters, and the NI Assembly does not have the competence to legislate on these. Schedule 2 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998 sets out these areas. Many UK-wide issues such as broadcasting and genetic research are known as reserved matters. This category originally included policing and criminal justice system, but those matters were devolved and therefore moved to the transferred field on 12th of April 2010. Schedule 3 of the Northern Ireland Act sets out which matters fall into the reserved category. Anything that isn't explicitly reserved or accepted in Schedules 2 or 3 is deemed to be devolved, and the Assembly has full legislative competence. It does not require consent from Westminster or HM government to legislate. Transferred matters, so issues on which Northern Ireland Assembly has full legislative power, so they've got control over these areas: health and social services, education, employment and skills, agriculture, social security, pensions and child support, housing, economic development, local government, environmental issues including planning, transport, culture and sport, Northern Ireland civil service, equal opportunities and justice and policing. The reserved matters, these are issues where legislative authority generally rests with Westminster, which is in London, but where the Northern Ireland Assembly can legislate with the consent of the Secretary of State. And these include areas such as firearms and explosives, financial services and pensions regulations, broadcasting, import and export controls, navigation and civil aviation, international trade and financial markets, telecommunications and postage, the foreshore and seabed, anything to do with like the river ocean side of it, disqualification from assembly membership, consumer safety, and intellectual property. 4M1, appraise the extent of parliamentary privilege. So parliaments need certain rights or immunities to ensure they can operate freely and independently. As the report of a predecessor Joint Committee on Parliamentary Privilege published in 1999 stated that Parliament makes the law and raises taxes. It's also the place where ministers are called to account by representatives of the whole nation for their decisions and their expenditure on public money. Grievances, great and small, can be aired regardless of the power or wealth of those criticised. In order to carry out these public duties without fear or favour, Parliament and its members, our officers, need certain rights and immunities. Parliament needs the right to regulate its own affairs, free from intervention by the government or the courts. Members need to be able to speak freely, uninhibited by possible defamation claims. The precise rights and immunities by Parliament will have to depend on the wider constitutional context. And different countries protect parliaments in different ways. But whatever the jurisdiction, it is normal for a democratic state to protect parliamentary independence. In the UK, Parliament's such rights and immunities are provided by means of parliamentary privilege. Privilege refers to the range of freedoms and protections each house needs to function effectively. So in brief, it comprises the right of each house to control its own proceedings and precincts, and the right of those participating in parliamentary proceedings, whether or not they are members, to speak freely without fear of legal liability or other reprisals. There are jurisdictions in which parliamentarians themselves are shielded from prosecution for crimes unrelated to their office, as long as they remain members. That is not the case in the UK. Parliamentary privilege came to the public attention in the wake of 2009, where expenses scandal, where 3 former MPs and 1 member of the House of Lords, accused of false accounting over their expenses, sought to argue that they ought not to be prosecuted because of parliamentary privilege. So what were happening was MPs were claiming false expenses for, their MPs' duties, parliamentary privilege. So there was a scandal where people were claiming money for things like, a second home, and claiming rent, and then claiming things for buying a 65-inch TV. So that was all wrong, though. It wasn't something you should have been doing, because, it's the taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
Yeah, on 8th of April 2010, the then leader of the opposition, David Cameron, announced that if elected, the Conservatives would legislate to implement the recommendations of the 1999 Joint Committee on Parliamentary Privilege in order to remove what then shadow leader of the House of Commons, Sir George Young, described as a grey area of whether parliamentary privilege precluded criminal prosecution of members accused of false accounting over parliamentary expenses. The then leader of oppositions pledged to legislate what was repeated in the Conservative Party manifesto for 2010 general elections, stated that we will introduce a Parliamentary Privilege Act to make it clear that privilege cannot be abused by MPs to evade justice. The Coalition Programme for Government on 20th of May 2010 incorporated a similar commitment, and the Queen's speech on 25th of May 2010 announced a draft bill will be published on reforming parliamentary privilege, and the government published its green paper on parliamentary privilege. What do you think the reason behind this was? Do you think people were abusing their power?
Yeah, and this was introduced to avoid people to abuse.
Yeah,
their
because you
power.
could. That means you could claim for anything. It's taxpayers' money, and you could claim for whatever you wanted, and it wasn't really right, to be honest, was it?
No, it wasn't.
No.
It's just people's money.
Yeah. So if anyone can get a 65-inch TV and pay the rent and stuff, and it wasn't related to their, parliamentary duties, then, it was a criminal offence.
Yeah.
The Green Paper describes its purpose as follows. We believe the time is now right to take a comprehensive look at the scope and operation to ensure that parliamentary privilege continues to operate to protect the effective functioning of our democracy. It notes that in doing so, we are guided by many in Parliament who have considered these questions before, above all, the 1998 Joint Committee on Parliamentary Privilege. The Joint Committee on Parliamentary Privilege was chaired by Lord Nichols of Birkenhead, a Lord of Appeal in Ordinary, and first met in November 1997. Its report was published on 9th of April 1999 and subsequently debated in the House of Commons. While the Joint Committee considered that Parliament needed the right to regulate its own affairs and members needed to be able to speak freely, it proposed clarification of the scope of various privileges, and in some cases greater powers for the courts to examine proceedings in Parliament. It recommended that all the changes proposed in its report should be embodied in a new and comprehensive Parliamentary Privileges Act, codifying parliamentary privilege as a whole. Neither House formally endorsed the report. While the government generally supported its recommendations, no time was found for legislation in any of the subsequent 10 parliamentary sessions, although the report's recommendations on sub judice formed the basis of new resolutions in each House. Indeed, with regard to the Joint Committee's central conclusion, the current Green Paper suggests that the case was not being made for a comprehensive codification of parliamentary privilege. So this is just to conclude what parliamentary privilege is and why there is a need for it in regards to the concept of parliamentary privilege. Other privilege cases have dealt with the protection of a witness from punishment as a result of what is said to a committee. 18 attempts to influence committee members, 19 attempts to intimidate a member of Parliament, former minister rebooked for giving misleading evidence to committee, and police searches on parliamentary estate. This privilege is still regularly invoked as protection for those who participate in proceedings. Parliamentary privilege is a living concept and still serves to protect Parliament, each House, their committees, and all those involved in proceedings. Much has changed since the publication of the report of 1999. Joint Committee privilege evolves as Parliament evolves, as the law evolves. 4D1. Appraise the political advantages and disadvantages of the first past the post system. First past the post system is a plurality voting system. The candidate who wins the most votes in each constituency is elected. Their first preference, voters may then choose to express further preferences for as many or as few candidates as they wish. The count begins by allocating votes in line with first preferences. In elections to the House of Commons, a single individual is elected from a parliamentary constituency to serve as a member of Parliament. This can be done either by the current voting system known as first past the post FPTP or by the alternative vote system. This note describes the operation of two systems. First past the post. In elections held under the first past the post system, each voter makes a mark next to the candidate on the ballot paper. First past the post is a plurality voting system. The candidate who wins the most votes in constituency is elected. So the red candidate wins with 32% of votes. And then the yellow and the green, 68% votes to the other candidates. And then the blue is 68%. And then first past the post is a majority of the vote system in which the winner takes all. And it gives you a ballot paper there where you'd actually put, if you've ever voted, you'd put a cross near the one that you want to vote for. Mm-hmm. The alternative vote. In elections held under the alternative vote, each voter may rank candidates on ballot paper in order of preference, 1, 2, or 3. For this reason, the alternative vote is known as preferential voting system. After making their first preference, voters may then choose to express further preferences for as many or as few candidates as they wish. The count begins by allocating votes in line with preferences. If a candidate has absolute majority, more than 50% of the votes after the allocation, they are elected. If no candidate has absolute majority, then the candidate in the last place is eliminated and their votes are allocated according to the next highest preference expressed on each ballot paper. If a voter has not marked a preference for any candidate that remains in the contest, then the ballot paper is set aside from the count. The process continues until a candidate has absolutely majority of votes left in the count and is elected. So this is a example of an alternative vote ballot paper in regards to the alternative vote system. So voters are allocated on the basis of first preference. Does one candidate have more than 50% of the votes left in the court? If they do, the candidate is elected. If they don't, then the candidate with fewest votes is eliminated and then votes are redistributed. First past the post system. The voting used to elect MPs and UK parliaments is called first past the post. The advantages of the first past the post system is that close MP constituency relationship. One representative is elected for each constituency, and this usually means that there will be a strong constituency MP relationship. It also means that if voters do not like their MP, they can also vote to get rid of an individual person. The next advantage is one party strong government. Usually one party wins the election, which means the winning party gets 5 years to put its plan in, given its manifesto into action. In 2015, it was the Conservative Party who won the general election. And another advantage is simplicity. The first past the post system is easily understood and familiar. Voters are given the chance a few years ago to get rid of the first past the post system for UK Parliament elections, but they chose to keep it. The disadvantages of first past the post system is minority of the vote. In most constituencies, more people vote against the winning candidate than for them. Sometimes an MP can be elected on vote as low as only 35% and minority of the vote. The winning party is also usually elected by less than 50% of the voters. In 2015, the Conservative Party won the election and formed the government, but only 36.9% of the people who voted chose to support the Conservatives. Another disadvantage is smaller parties do not gain fair representation. In 2015, UKIP polled 12.6% of the vote, but returned only one MP. In Scotland, Labour received 24.3% of the vote and returned one MP, while with SNP received 50% of the vote, returned 56 of the 59 Scottish members of Parliament. Tactical voting. It is argued that the first past the post system encourages tactical voting, which is a disadvantage, as they think that vote will have little chance of helping elect their candidates. For example, in a constituency or seat that usually returns a Conservative MP, sometimes called a safe seat, there is little point in a voter choosing Labour, as they are unlikely to have their candidate elected. Where this happens, and it happens in many constituencies, people may vote not for a candidate they prefer, but against a candidate they dislike. 2/3 of constituencies in the UK are described as safe seats. Now, constituency is a place, so you have your own MP for your area, okay? And that MP is there supposed to help you, supposed to come up with any sort of ideas in regards to any sort of, any sort of plans they want to put forward, because they have 5 years to put these plans forward. And, what kind of things can they, put forward?
Like about the health system, the
Yes.
educational system.
Yeah. And what about, like, could they put forwards in regards to what else could they put forward? What kind of changes? Like an example I'll give you, in a park, there may be, too many, pests, rats and things like that. So for health and safety purposes, if children are going to the park, do you think it's good to have the pests there?
No.
So they have to bring in health and safety, conditions in place and start improving the park. Also, there was a park a couple of years ago that I know that they found, for drug users, they found needles in the park. And there were needles that had been used. So what the MP did for that constituent is if children are going to the park and there's
Mhm.
needles that are used, children don't know what they are.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so the constituents, the MP for that area, brought in reforms where the park was cleaned, and you know that these needles were got rid of. So there was someone always coming in to make sure that the park was kept clean for the children.
Okay.
So
Okay.
because you know, you can't prevent people coming and doing what they do in the park, but you
Okay.
can make sure as a constituent MP that
Mhm.
everything is, you know, put in place for children, because the whole
Okay.
point of the park is that it needs to be a secure area for children to go or for families to go. So you know,
Exactly.
there are MPs that are quite good at, you know, doing stuff like, you know, historically, an MP may be there to save an old library. You know, if someone wants to shut down a library because there's not much use of it, they could, you know, put a petition together and try and save historical buildings, things like that. And also,
Okay.
you know, like potholes in roads, you know, that affect the, you know, day-to-day running of the constituent. You know,
Yeah.
potholes in road
They could
damage,
even cause accidents. Yeah.
yeah, cause accidents. And especially another thing that was quite popular, you know, in the time of winter, gritting. They got rid of a lot of the you know, gritting lorries. So what the issue was, people complained, and then a lot of the lorries were brought back and gritting was put because people were having accidents and falling because of the snow. So, you know, these kind of things you can bring to the attention of your constituent MP. So
Okay.
these are the references we've used for today's sessions, which you can go onto. You can just link onto them, and you could go onto them, and they will help you in regards to what you need to do and any sort of extra additional reading you want for this area. Okay.
All right.
Has anyone got any questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
Olu, have you got any questions? I think it's Jacqueline and it was Olu. Jacqueline,
Yeah.
have you got any questions or anything?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, so have a look at the Moodle site for any additional resources and for your other PowerPoint slides, recordings, and I will see you in the next session. And thank you for your patience, and thank you for attending the session today.
Thank you too.
And I will
Thank you
see you
too.
next week, okay?
Oh,
Have a
okay.
nice week.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.